All right, so how do we maintain GFR, or glomerular filtration rate? So, so there are a couple of things that handle this. So mechanisms to maintain GFR, or glomerular filtration rate. All right, so the first mechanism has to do with the arterial, the afferent arterial. So we call this the myogenic reflex. So myogenic, of course, hopefully you're thinking of smooth muscle. So this is created by the smooth muscle in the afferent arterial. Okay, so if the arterial, that's the afferent arterial, we know it's an arterial, so it's going to have these little bands of smooth muscle around it, right? Okay, and within these bands of smooth muscle, there are little receptors. And these receptors are stretch receptors. So sensory stretch receptors. And obviously they respond to stretch. Okay, so if blood pressure is high, so if that's the stimulus, then those receptors are going to they're going to stretch. So they will feel more stretch. So that will be an indication that the pressure is high. We've got more blood coming in, it's stretching out the walls of the arterial, and it's feeling that. So when that happens, those receptors open calcium channels. And when calcium channels open, we get smooth muscle contraction. And that basically is vasoconstriction. So the smooth muscle is going to contract, the lumen is going to get smaller. So less blood is going to go into the glomerulus. Less blood goes into the glomerulus, that'll provide a lower pressure, and that won't increase glomerular filtration rate. It does that enough and lowers the amount of blood that goes in there, so it lowers the amount of pressure to keep that glomerular filtration rate within that 180 liters. Okay. So this reflex, this myogenic reflex, occurs instantly. So it's going to happen right as, pressure's up. That's going to happen because the arterial is going to feel that stretch. Okay. The other control for GFR, glomerular filtration rate, is called tubuloglomerular control. So this is going to involve the juxtaglomerular apparatus. So if we can show this again. So we have our little go ahead and make the juxtaglomerular apparatus. So we have our little Bowman's capsule. Right, and we have our entering and exiting arterioles. So here's the afferent, here's the efferent. All right, and then we know that the distal convoluted tubule comes up through here. And we know that the distal convoluted tubule has some specialized cells called macula densa. And we know that the vessels also have specialized cells called juxtaglomerular cells. And both of these two things together make up the juxtaglomerular apparatus. So what happens in the juxtaglomerular apparatus? Okay, well, the macula densa cells they monitor the filtrate. So, of course, the filtrate is that fluid that's coming through the distal convoluted tubule. Remember, that's what this guy is, the DCT there. And it monitors it for sodium. Okay. So, if sodium levels are high, okay, then that is going to indicate that blood pressure is down. Okay, so if the macula densa cells perceive, so if they perceive that the filtrate indicates low blood pressure. So that means that's going to mean high sodium. Because again, we're talking about the filtrate, and it's easy to confuse talking about the filtrate and talking about the blood. So if sodium is high in the filtrate, that means it's leaving the blood. And as it's leaving the blood, water goes with it, or fluid follows it. Okay, just by osmosis, water follows it. So that means blood volume is going to decrease. If blood volume is down, blood pressure is down. So when the macula densa cells alert that there's low blood pressure, they signal the juxtaglomerular cells to secrete something called renin. So renin is like a hormone, and it goes into the blood, and what it does is it reacts to some special plasma proteins. So renin will react with a plasma protein called Angiotensin Ii. So every time we've looked at anything called something inogen, that basically it's just a plasma protein that's not activated. So once renin gets into contact with angiotensinogen, that kind of activates it. It turns it into angiotensin I. And Angiotensin I itself doesn't have a lot of impact, okay? Angiotensin I, if it can come into contact with an enzyme called ACE, then it will become angiotensin II. And this is the one that we care about. Okay, so I'm going to come back over here and we'll talk about angiotensin II. All right, so angiotensin II, what's so great about it? What does it do? Well, angiotensin II is a strong vasoconstrictor. So it causes systemic vasoconstriction. So not just vasoconstriction at the arteriole, it's vasoconstriction all over the body. Okay, so it starts vasoconstriction. It increases thirst. All right, so if you're thirsty, maybe you'll drink some water and that will provide some and increase blood volume. And it also increases cardiac output. So it increases heart rate and stroke volume, which brings in more blood into the vessels. Okay, so it brings up blood pressure. So again, as far as GFR, it brings up the blood pressure so that the glomerular filtration rate will stay at the 180 and not get lower than that. Okay, so this is not going to happen immediately. It's going to take a bit because we got to do a few things. You know, the macula densa cells have to alert the juxtaglomerular cells. That has to secrete the renin. Renin has to find angiotensinogen, and angiotensinogen turns into angiotensin I. Then we got to find ACE, and then ACE finally turns it into angiotensin II. So this is how we maintain that glomerular filtration rate. Now, this renin mechanism, this is not the end of the story there. Okay, so this is just the first half of it. So as we move on and we get into fluid balance, then we'll complete this with aldosterone with this. But hold that thought so we can complete this, and then we'll get into that. So the next thing we need to talk about is we need to get into the proximal convoluted tubule, figure out what's happening there.